Tullus Hostilius might be the least known Roman king, in both the case of the public and historians. We don't really have many definitive records on Tullius, nor what exactly he did. We do know that he was not like his predecessor, Numa Pompilius. Tullius was belligerent and warlike. He was a ruler in line with Romulus rather than Numa. So what do we know about the third Roman king? Let's talk about it. Before we get any further into today's episode, I just want to quickly ask that you subscribe and like if you enjoy my content. It really helps the channel out and it motivates me to make more content. Also, follow me on Twitter to get updates about any videos in progress. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. I again just want to put in a quick notice that we should take these stories with a bit of skepticism. Many of the deeds, and even the people themselves in the histories of this period, may not have been real, or may not have happened in the way we are told they did. Just keep that in mind as we talk about Tullius. We know so little about Tullius that we have no idea when he was actually born. We do know that he came to the throne in 672 BCE, the same year that Numa Pompilius had died. We can probably safely assume that Tullius was born in the reign of Numa. Remember that Numa came to the throne in 715 BCE. This would mean that if Tullius had been born the year Numa came to power, he would have been 43 the year he took the throne. It's very hard to imagine that Tullius could have been much older than that. Tullius was a full-blooded Roman, and was the grandson of Tullus Hostilius, who had fought alongside Romulus against the Sabines. Hostus died during the attack by the Sabines in reprisal for the rape of the Sabine women. Hostus was selected as the Roman army's champion and fought his Sabine counterpart, Medius Curtius, in single combat. Hostus was unable to defeat the Sabine, and his defeat very nearly broke the Roman army. Hostus's wife, Hersilia, was also, at least according to Livy, the woman to lead the Sabine women in begging for peace between the two sides. We don't know what sort of effect having such an ancestor would have had on Tullius's campaign to become king, but I think we can safely assume that it was in no way negative. But we are getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Tullius still needed to get the approval of both the people of Rome and the gods. There was really only one obstacle in his way, the first Pontifex Maximus, Numa Marcius. While we don't know what exactly went down between the two during the competition for the throne, we do know that in the end Tullius would overcome Marcius. Marcius, presumably deeply depressed after his defeat, would end up starving himself to death. Yes, you heard that correctly, starving himself to death. To sort of rub some salt in the wound, Numa Marcius' son, also named Numa Marcius, would go on to serve as Praefectus Urbi, and would go on to actually be the father of the fourth Roman king, Ansus Marcius. Anyway, Tullius would receive assent from both the people of Rome and the gods and take the Roman throne in 672 BCE. We only really know of two main events that are ascribed to Tullius. Historians still debate today on if these events should be ascribed to him or if perhaps another king deserves the credit. However, the legends do state that Tullius was in charge for both. I would personally take all of this with a grain of salt. Just as I have been warning for other Roman kings, it is really tough to say who actually did what. Not only that, most historians, and your friendly neighborhood YouTuber here, firmly believe that Rome likely had quite a few more kings than 7. I, for one, believe that the reason Tullius had so little events and actions attributed to him is because Livy and the other Roman sources were simply unable to find much documentation for this period of Roman history. I would imagine that they could only find scraps of events and actions during this period, and Tullius might have been the only name they could find to attribute any of this to. There is also the simple fact that Tullius was sort of redundant for Roman history. Rome already had Romulus as the warlike leader who taught the Romans how to fight. They didn't really need another one. So maybe the Romans didn't really want to bother with recording the deeds and history of Tullius. Again, this is all just my own speculation, but whatever the case, the legends only attribute 2 important events to Tullius. The first, and arguably more important, was the subjugation of Alba Longa. At some point during his reign, Tullius decided he wished to subjugate the city. However, the two sides agreed that a costly war between them could open the door for Etruscan invasion. This would have meant the likely destruction, or at least a pretty bad episode of looting in both cities. Instead of fighting an all-out war, Medius Fuedius, the dictator of Alba Longa, suggested that the two sides choose 3 champions to fight in place of each other's armies. Depending on who you decide to believe, the 3 champions chosen by each side were either triplets or just simply brothers. On the Roman side, the Herati stood, while the Curati stood on the side of Alba Longa. Both sides, realizing just how much was at stake, fought valiantly. The Herati managed to wound all 3 of the Curati, but in the process 2 of their number were killed. The last Herati remaining, Publius, was uninjured, but surrounded by the 3 surviving Curati. Publius knew that he could not win a straight-up mano-a-mano fight. He needed to use some sort of tactic to level the playing field. The 3 Curati were all injured, and Publius knew that if he could fight each one individually, he would win. So, Publius took off running across the battlefield, and the Curati gave chase. However, with their injuries, the Curati quickly began to split up, and eventually all 3 were separated. Publius, seeing this separation, quickly turned and slaughtered the closest Curati. Publius quickly ran towards the second Curati before he could regroup with his brother, and slew him as well. The final brother of the trio was physically injured and completely demoralized, having just watched his 2 brothers die in front of him, and yet he staggered to his feet and faced Publius head-on. Publius, confident of his victory, declared that he had killed the first 2 Curati to avenge his brothers, but that he would kill the last one for the Roman cause. Pretty badass, right? Publius quickly killed the last Curati and claimed the armor of his fallen foes as spoils of war. This would eventually backfire on Publius, as on his return to Rome, his sister, Camilla, who had been engaged to one of the Curati, recognized her lover's cloak as she had made it for him. In grief, she began to cry and scream the Curati's name. Publius was aghast, and declared that no Roman woman should mourn the death of Rome's enemies, and slew his sister. Publius would be sentenced to death, only to appeal to the people of Rome, who were persuaded by the pleas of his father to spare his only remaining son. His sentence would be commuted. After Publius's victory, Medius Fuedius followed the terms set out before the war, and the city of Alba Longa became a vassal of Rome. Medius, however, was not happy with this outcome, and almost immediately began scheming with the cities of Veii, an Etruscan state to the north of Rome, and Fidene, a Latin city near Rome. Veii would eventually become one of the first enemies of the Roman Republic, and their wars would last for some 300 years. In this case, Medius was able to successfully instigate a war between the 3 cities. Tullius called upon Medius in Alba Longa to help the Roman army in their battle against Veii and Fidene. Medius actually did respond to the call and joined forces with the Romans. The 2 armies lined up to face each other, and the battle commenced. However, the Albans and Medius retreated up a hill to watch the battle, with Medius determined to join whichever side seemed to be winning. Tullius, seeing the Alban army leaving, quickly shouted out in Latin that this retreat was planned, and that the Romans should not panic. The Fidenites, being Latin speakers, understood this message, and quickly assumed that they had been played by Medius, and they quickly broke. The Romans quickly routed the remaining soldiers on the battlefield, and won the day. Tullius was absolutely furious, and quickly captured the shocked Medius. Tullius decreed that since Medius was torn between the 2 sides, the same should be done to his body. Medius's arms were attached to 2 chariots that the Romans then sent running in either direction. I'm sure I don't need to describe what happens to a human body when it is pulled with such force in both directions. Let's just say that Medius would no longer be a problem, and Tullius had just discouraged anyone from rebelling against Rome. However, Tullius was not done. In penance for their leader's betrayal, the city of Alba Longa was to be destroyed, and the citizens of the city would be relocated to Rome, where they would become full Roman citizens. I've always found this story to be somewhere on the edge of believable and completely insane. I can completely believe that Alba Longa and Rome wanted to go to war. I can even believe that the cities came together and realized that a war at this moment would invite destruction. But the story of the brothers or triplets feels a bit unbelievable. We know from the historical record, archaeology in particular, that Alba Longa was subjugated by Rome during its regal period. However, most historians agree that it likely happened at a much later date than that given by Livy, and thus much later than in our narrative. I also have a hard time believing that the Romans themselves would have destroyed Alba Longa. Remember, if Livy is to be believed, even during Tullius's reign, the Romans regarded Alba Longa as their mother city. Would Rome be willing to destroy their mother city? Maybe. I don't know, and I doubt we will ever know for sure. But it is important for us to realize in our study of Tullius that much of his reign and achievements are shrouded in myth, and it's quite possible that everything we have discussed and will discuss isn't quite right. I think this is something truly beautiful about history. Our understanding changes so often, and in a few years we may possibly know the truth about what happened to Alba Longa. You just never know. Anyway, after the destruction of Alba Longa, Tullius invited some of the high-ranking families in Alba Longa to join the ranks of the Roman patricians and the Roman Senate. Several of these families would go on to establish themselves as important members of the Roman aristocracy. The most prominent examples being the Julii, the Cervelli, the Quincidi, the Gagani, the Curati, and the Coeli. The Quincidi, the Gagani, the Curati, and the Coeli would all have members, or at least a member, who would achieve the consulship. However, the Cervelli and the Julii were the true success stories. The Cervelli genes, or family, would produce consuls and other high-ranking officials from at least 495 BCE to at least 189 CE, very nearly 700 years. The Julii, or the Julia genes, would not only produce consuls and other high-ranking members of society during the Republic, but would eventually give birth to the Julius Caesar, Augustus, the whole Julio-Claudian dynasty, and many more emperors even up to the splitting of the empire in the late 3rd century. So we can thank Tullius and his destruction of Alba Longa for eventually giving us everyone's favorite empire. With the expansion of the Roman Senate, with the adoption of the Alban aristocratic families, Tullius recognized that the Senate needed a bigger building, and so Tullius ordered the construction of the Curia Hostilia. The Curia Hostilia was located on the northwestern edge of the Roman Forum. Originally, the site held a temple, where legends state that warring tribes had laid down their weapons during the reign of Romulus. Tullius was able to build his Senate building as the temple had burned down sometime shortly before the defeat of Alba Longa. However, there is some serious reason to doubt this story. For one, the ruins inside of Rome have been dated to 600 BCE, well outside of Tullius's reign. Some historians have recently proposed that the regal period should actually be shortened from its current duration of 240 years to 120 years. This would place the accomplishments of various kings between 625 BCE and 500 BCE. If we use this time frame, the years come much closer together, and it becomes possible that Tullius could have ordered the construction of the Curia Hostilia. This would help explain why Tullius's name is associated with the building. I again cannot stress enough that much of what we are talking about here could be completely wrong. Most historians seriously doubt the authenticity of the deeds of the Roman kings. Tullius seems to be a bit too much like Romulus to just be a coincidence, and his name is literally Hostilius, meaning hostile in Latin. I mean, how on the nose can you be? In my opinion, I think there is a good chance that much like Romulus, Tullius likely was a real historical figure, perhaps even a king. However, I think these events and accomplishments are likely not his own, and have instead been attributed to him by later historians and Romans. In any case, Livy says that in 640 BCE, Tullius would die. There are two conflicting stories of his death. The first is that Tullius was told by a voice from the heavens that because the people of Alba Longa, which had just been conquered by Rome, have forgotten to sacrifice to the gods, the punishment would now transfer to the Romans. In response, Tullius quickly organized religious rites. However, they were obviously not impressive enough, or they were simply inept. And so, the furious Jupiter struck Tullius in his home with lightning, thus killing the king, his family, and his servants. The other story, and in my opinion the much more believable story, is that Anicius Marcius, remember him? The old grandson of Numa Marcius, the guy who Tullius beat to be king? Anyway, Anicius would march to Tullius's home with a few co-conspirators. Each person had a sword hidden beneath their robes. The party would gain entry to the house, where they would kill everyone inside, including Tullius. They would then burn the house down to ensure that no one survived. In many ways, the legend of Tullius's death resembles that of Romulus's. Both have two possible deaths, one involving the gods, and the other involving their political rivals. In any case, Tullus was now dead, and Rome would need a new king. Tullus Hostilius is a king of Rome that I think most people would forget about. With only 2 achievements attributed to him, even in a mythological record that seems to love exaggerating the achievements and deeds of their kings, Tullus is fairly easy to skip over. However, Tullius still deserves to be remembered. He integrated a city in Alba Longa that had supposedly been founded by the descendants of Troy itself. He built the building that the Roman Senate would meet in for centuries to come. Overall, Tullius is seriously underrated in the mythological record of Roman kings. And if it wasn't for the simple fact that he was surrounded by legends like Romulus or Numa Pompilius, Tullius would surely be in the running for the greatest Roman of all time. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. If you have any comments or questions on the video, or believe I've made a mistake, please comment down below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel out. Peace.